I still remember the exact moment my confidence died. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It happened quietly. In a glass-walled office, under fluorescent lights, while the rest of the world kept moving like nothing had changed. My name is Sarah. And for 6 years, I gave everything I had to a company that didn't even know my last name. I was the kind of employee who arrived before everyone else and left after the janitor turned off the lights. I missed birthdays. I skipped vacations. I answered emails at midnight because I genuinely believed that hard work was the one language every boss understood. I believed in loyalty the way some people believe in religion, completely, blindly, without question. The company was a mid-sized marketing firm, polished on the outside, toxic on the inside. And at the very centre of that toxicity sat my boss, Mr. Daniel Holt. Daniel was the kind of man who wore expensive suits and cheap morals. He smiled at clients and sneered at his own team. He took credit for our ideas in boardrooms and assigned blame to us in private. And somehow, everyone above him thought he was extraordinary. I had worked directly under him for 3 of my 6 years there. I knew his habits, his preferences, his presentation style. I had saved his biggest campaigns from falling apart. Quietly, behind the scenes, without asking for recognition. And I told myself that was okay, because one day he would see it. One day, he would say the words I had been waiting for. "You've earned this." That day never came. Instead, what came was a Monday morning in March. Grey skies, cold coffee, and a meeting I hadn't been warned about. He called me into his office, closed the door behind me, didn't ask me to sit down. I stood there, folders in hand, thinking maybe this was finally my moment. A promotion perhaps, a new project, some form of acknowledgement after years of silent sacrifice. He looked up from his desk, slowly, the way people do when they want you to feel small, before they even speak. And then he said it. "Sarah, let's be honest, you're not built for growth, you're a support role. You've always been a support role. And honestly, that's probably all you'll ever be." I felt the air leave the room. He kept talking. Something about restructuring, about new directions, about the team needing stronger leadership energy. But I couldn't hear any of it. Because something inside me had just quietly shattered. But what I didn't know that day was that his words, the ones meant to bury me, were actually the ones that would wake me up. I walked out of his office with a smile on my face. Not because I was okay, but because I had learned in 6 years how to perform okayness like a professional. I sat back at my desk, opened my laptop, stared at a spreadsheet I had built from scratch, a campaign tracker that the entire department relied on, and for the first time I felt like a stranger in my own work. That evening, I went home and cried in a way I hadn't cried since losing my mother. Deep, ugly, exhausting sobs. The kind that leave you hollow. But somewhere in the middle of that breakdown, something shifted. I started to get angry. Not the kind of anger that makes you reckless. The kind that makes you clear. I began to look at things differently. I pulled out old emails, ones where I had presented full campaign strategies that Daniel had later presented as his own in senior meetings. I found documented timelines, project files with my name buried in metadata, while his name sat bold on the cover slide. I wasn't imagining it. It was all there. For 3 years, he had been using my mind to build his reputation. And then, as if the universe wanted to make sure I was paying attention, I found out something worse. A colleague, Maya, came to me one afternoon looking nervous. She sat beside me, lowered her voice, and told me that Daniel had been actively blocking my promotion requests. Twice in 2 years, upper management had flagged me for a senior role. Twice, Daniel had told them I wasn't ready and lacked strategic thinking. He hadn't been neglecting to see my value. He had been deliberately hiding it. Because the moment I moved up, he would lose the person doing half his job for free. That night, I didn't cry. I planned. I spent 2 weeks quietly gathering everything. Every email, every project file, every version history showing my original work versus what he submitted publicly. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to confront him in anger and hand him the power to dismiss me as emotional. I was going to be strategic. I was going to be calm. I was going to speak in the only language corporate power truly understands: evidence. I also did something I had been too afraid to do for years. I updated my resume, reached out to 2 former colleagues who had moved to a larger competing firm. And when they asked how things were going, I told them the truth for the first time. Within a week, I had a conversation that would change everything. A senior director at the competing firm. A woman named Claire, who had a reputation for building strong teams, told me she had heard my name before. Apparently, my work on a product launch campaign 2 years ago had made quiet waves in the industry. She had assumed I was already at a director level. I told her I had been told I wasn't built for growth. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "Whoever told you that was protecting themselves, not telling you the truth. Can we meet this week?" And just like that, the door I had been knocking on for 6 years opened from the other side. I handed in my resignation on a Thursday morning. I didn't make a scene. I didn't send a company-wide email. I didn't storm into Daniel's office with a speech prepared. I simply placed a clean, professional letter on his desk and watched his face as he read it. The smirk he always carried faded slowly, like a light being dimmed. "You're leaving. Where are you going?" I smiled, genuinely this time. Somewhere I'm actually valued. I had already signed an offer with Claire's firm, a senior strategist title, a salary that was 40% higher than what I had been earning. A team that had been built on the idea that people do their best work when they feel seen. But the story doesn't end there. 3 weeks after I left, an internal audit was triggered at the old company. Not because of me, but because another team member had raised concerns about credit allocation on a major campaign. In the process, HR began reviewing project documentation. My fingerprints, quite literally, through metadata and version history, were on nearly every major campaign Daniel had taken credit for in the past 3 years. I received a call from HR asking if I'd be willing to speak to their review board. Voluntarily, I said yes. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't dramatize. I simply showed them what I had quietly saved. The emails, the files, the timelines. 2 months later, a mutual colleague told me that Daniel had been quietly asked to step down from his director role. No public announcement. No dramatic exit. Just a man who had built his tower on borrowed foundations and watched it quietly collapse. And me? I was sitting in a sunlit office in a new building, leading my first major campaign as a senior strategist. A team of 7 people who actually listened when I spoke. A boss who ended every meeting by asking, "Does anyone feel unheard?" I think about that grey Monday morning in March sometimes. I think about standing in his office, folders in hand, waiting for words that never came. And I want to say something to every woman who has ever stood in that kind of silence. The person who tells you that you are too small, is usually the person most afraid of how big you can become. Your value does not require their validation. Your worth does not shrink because someone chose not to see it. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is quietly gather your evidence, protect your peace, and walk through a door that was always meant for you. I didn't get my revenge by destroying him. I got it by becoming everything he told me I couldn't be.